Full spoilers ahead.
R.I.P.D. 2, The Rise of the Damned, is the 2022 spiritual sequel to 2013's R.I.P.D. It's directed by Paul Layden, who also wrote it along with Andrew Klein.
Hello folks, just a friendly warning. This review started out like all my other reviews, and then I got about 3 minutes into the movie and things descended fairly rapidly into a rant. So if you're the kind of person that's sensitive to things like sarcasm and extreme nitpicking, you might want to turn the volume down. Just saying.
The plot.
The movie opens with the dreaded Universal 1440 logo, and I'm already wondering why I've committed myself to reviewing this. We meet Otis, played by Richard Brake, and Otis is digging up the floor of Rob Zombie's recent Monsters movie set in hopes of finding gold, which sounds almost exactly like what Rob Zombie was doing. Whilst digging, Otis is attacked by a slew of Adobe After Effects, which I'm in no position to criticize myself, given I can't afford the monthly subscription. But after his eyes go black, the credits roll and we can assume Otis is going to be our bad guy. We shoot forward a month to Horseshoe, Wyoming, where we meet Sheriff Roy Pucifer as he's collecting his daughter and her fiancé from the train station. When out of nowhere, the Samuel Brothers gang arrives on horseback. So Sheriff Roy makes sure his daughter's safe while announcing he doesn't care what happens to her fiancé before he gets to defending the town from whatever it is the gang's there to do. Despite appearing like he knows what he's doing, Roy makes a first-year rookie mistake by forgetting to look behind him. 5 seconds later, he's shuttled off down a brilliant white hand-drawn corridor to the R.I.P.D., where he meets Hanno. She takes him on a tour through the rest of Rob Zombie's Monsters set and into the wannabe Men in Black weapons room. She tells him he'll be sending deados back to hell. As soon as Roy agrees to the new job, Hanno sends him back to Earth with Rob Zombie's equipment. Back on Earth, all decked out in fancy leather threads, the bumbling sheriff's not even wise enough to sidestep a buffalo stampede you would have literally heard coming from miles away. But that's totally okay, because Sheriff Roy doesn't need to be on the ball in this movie, because he's got Juna to look after him. She's got a sword and a brand new plastic Hot Topic costume on, because Universal 1440. After Juna reminds Roy how much better she is than him on pretty much everything, Roy heads off home to check on his daughter. And right when he's about to say hello, Juna drags him away from the door and beats him up. But seconds later, Roy realizes the afterlife sped up his reactions. So he fights back, and we're treated to a real Bruce Lee quality scuffle. But in the end, Juna's still faster and tougher. And once she's got the better of him, she shows him his true appearance in the reflection of her sword. And apparently, they're both African-American women. And when Roy suggests making them black women is going to make their jobs much harder because 1876 Americans aren't very broad-minded, June says to think of it as a lesson in walking in the shoes of those deemed less advantaged. And when Roy tells her his best friend is black, June comes back with this gem.
Just because you know them does not mean you understand what it's like to be them.
I knew ahead of time this wasn't going to be a great movie, but we've just ventured into completely different territory. Oh look, the fuse in my politeness filter is just blown. Whatever will I do now?
So Roy heads off to speak to his daughter anyways, but Juna tells him anything he says to her will only come out as an incoherent gibberish, which is rather ironic, given that sentence makes no sense and I could barely understand her ridiculous accent. And in the very next scene, when they're speaking to Roy's best friend as the black girls, her accent switches to French when she explains Roy's her mute sister. Then she starts sounding exactly like Greta Thunberg. But luckily, it's not for long because Roy's best friend's here to dump a bunch of information about the Samuel brothers on us. And it turns out they've stolen his daughter's fiancé. And even though Roy was happy to let him die in the opening shootout, saving him is now suddenly his top priority. And as he's leaving to save him, Roy the mute sister speaks, and nobody mentions it. So they head to the pass to head them off at the pass, because cowboys. And everyone acts the way you imagine they would in a movie like this. Punches are thrown, little girls beat up big men, and in the end, our main characters characters win stuff. And after they win stuff, we're treated to another Adobe After Effects display when a generic monster thing tries to get them, but they beat it too. Then they take the remaining Samuel Brothers member, labeled the adopted one in the opening scenes, and his accent comes and goes even between words in the same sentence. But we don't have to endure that for long either, because he goes Adobe After Effects a few seconds later. And after his hissy fit, he tells the girls about Otis, Richard Brake's character from the opening. And apparently, he's a real nasty deado. So they head to Red Creek to probably head him off at the pass too, because cowboys. We cut back to Richard Brake, and right when you think we've landed on some decent acting, his acting partner's accent is worse than Juna's was. So he steals the scene by acting supernatural cowboy circles around her with one of his patented Richard Brake ominous shit monologues. And I, for one, am fine with that. Meanwhile, back with the other characters, the adopted Samuel Brothers being dragged behind a horse. His acting makes you kinda wish something would scare the horse into running off through the forest at 20 miles per hour with him attached. We cut back to Richard Brake again, and he can convey emotion better than the rest of the cast just by showing you his teeth. When one of his posse questions him, he tears his heart out and talks to it. And I'm good with that too, because at least something happened. Back with the girls, the adopted Samuel acts annoying for 17 miles. And every time he annoys the girls, they shoot him again, over and over and over. Before she puts a bag over his head, she tells him,
"You're not as dumb as you look."
And 68 seconds later, when they check into a hotel in the next town, she tells the hotel owner,
"You're not as dumb as you look."
And we can attribute this repetition to the Universal 1440 logo. Why pay writers for 11 jokes when you can just reuse the same joke 11 times? The hotel owner refuses them service and refers them to the sign above the counter. So the white folks, who appear to be black folks, force the owner to burn the sign. And when he does, his black servant comes to take them to their room. And that's all I have to say about that. If you thought this movie was all over the place already, you wouldn't be wrong. But I'd advise you to tighten your bootstraps as you ain't seen nothing yet. June has decided the tiny town's sick because of something in the air that's affecting the living. She even knows where it's coming from, even though she's just literally sat down on the bed next to the window. The adopted Samuel gang member rambles and rambles and rambles, so they put the bag back over his head and head off to look into something. But I'm not actually sure what it is. Then they find the hotel owner tied up in the back of a wagon. That kicks off an information dump that literally makes you angrier the longer you tolerate it. They talk about a gateway to hell and poisonous gases seeping from it, and Otis turning people into deados so he can let the souls out of hell. And every time the angle cuts, the characters switch back and forth from male to female and black to white.
As an amateur video editor myself, I would like to take this opportunity to remind any young, hopeful video editors there is a time and a place for recreational drugs.
We jump ahead a lot of minutes, not because the timeline did, but because the dialogue nearly made me cry a few minutes ago. The hotel maid frees the adopted Samuel brother because reasons, and Roy and Juna get ambushed and thrown into a cage. Roy's daughter's fiance gets thrown into the same cage. So Roy and him become best friends. Even though Roy's an attractive young black girl now, Richard Brake shows up to regurgitate all the things they already said 2 scenes ago, and the girl with the accent's there too. And she reveals Joanne's actually Joan of Arc. Meanwhile, Richard Brake's got everyone digging a hole to hell with pickaxes. And when they break through, the special effects department goes bonkers with the Adobe After Effects. And I'm not saying they're better or different than the earlier ones. I'm just saying there's a lot more of them. Back in the cage, Joan of Arc says she's got a vial of Christ's tears. The adopted Samuel Brothers member comes to save them. The final plan becomes dropping the tears of Jesus into the hellfire. And also, apparently, the spirits can't possess you if your eyes are closed. And I apologize if I haven't mentioned the spirits possessing people already, as I've only really found out about it myself as I'm typing this. And then everyone fights everyone for about 10 minutes. Then Joan of Arc does a quadruple Lutz back handspring with a twist with Christ's tears in her hands. And she deposits the payload at the perfect time. So everything's over. Only it's not over, because Richard Brake comes back. So Roy and Juna fight the special effect until it's dead. And then it's over. Or at least it was for me, because I hit stop and went outside for some fresh air.
And there you have it, folks, whatever the hell that was. Let's take a look at the good bit.
The good bits. shite-bits.
For the second time this year, I find myself confused and overwhelmed trying to justify a movie's existence. I don't think it's coincidence that Rob Zombie's The Munsters was the first movie to make me feel like this, given they're both done by Universal 1440 in the exact same location. Everything looks cheap and amateur again. The special effects are home video quality again. I could think of 5 YouTubers off the top of my head that would have done a better job than this. The jokes weren't funny, and they were repeated again. They attempted to replicate the tone of the original R.I.P.D., but it came off like the jokes were written by somebody whose native language wasn't English. Which by itself isn't a problem, but writing humor in your own language is challenging enough. With the exception of Brake, who was barely in it, the acting was high school drama class bad. The story itself was so all over the place, I literally had to watch the movie in sections. And I can't even fall back on my cinematography safety net because the whole movie was shot against an orange and blue light bulb, the likes of which are lighting my workstation right this second as I'm typing this.
The verdict.
So, should you waste your time watching this total and utter joke of a project designed with the sole intention of making a few bucks off of somebody else's hard work?
No. Now I get it. November's a weird time for movies, and that's why they dumped this thing on Netflix in November. But do not waste precious time on this thing, folks. Life is so short. Use the time for something more enjoyable, like cleaning your kitchen or being hit by a car. Until next time, folks. It's me, Johnny, from that thing you just watched. If you enjoyed it, go down there and smash me in the face to subscribe. And if you want to watch another thing, there's one right there. Do it!